is Walter Wolfgang. Walter Wolfgang is a Vice President of CND. He's also the Education Officer for Richmond Park Labour Party. He's a former member of the NEC for the Labour Party.
I am speaking as a Jew, committed to the Jewish values of human brotherhood, empathy, and respect for foreigners and aliens, which has been pioneered by Judaism. I am committed to these principles, as I think are most, but not all, Jews. And these principles, I have to say, at this particular moment, conflict with the dominant interpretation of Zionism. Zionism is a house of many mansions. Its origins lies in the Crimea, in Odessa, where in the 19th century, early 19th century, Odessa was a Russian colony. And although it was a colony, and there were all colonizers, among the colonizers were lots of Jews. There was a pogrom. There were a series of pogroms. And the consequence was that some people in Odessa, most Jews in Odessa, turned away from the dominant ideology that emancipation of Jews was possible to one that Jews had to, would go to Palestine. They went to Palestine, and some of them wanted eventually a Jewish state, others didn't. As early as 1891, the principal spokesman of that movement, Asher Ginsberg, who wrote under the pseudonym Ahatam, criticized what Jewish settlers, and there were very few Jewish settlers, what Jewish settlers would do to native Palestinians, and basically said that if that was the future of Jewry in Palestine, he wouldn't have any part of it. Nowadays he is lauded in Israel as the founder of Jewish culture and so on, and and people say, well, his political views were a little bit eccentric. When Theodor Herzl, in reaction to the Dreyfus affair, advocated a Jewish state and did this independently of the Odessa movement, most of the rabbis of Central Europe signed an advert in all the newspapers denouncing that move and saying that Judaism looked forward to universal redemption through a Redeemer, which not everybody believes in, but through to universal redemption, and that part of this, that within a context where the lion would lie down with sheep, that within that context Jews would return to Palestine. But they couldn't do it separately. But there has been a history before that of false messianic movements within Judaism which tried to do that. And the worst one was the 16th century one of Shabbataite Swedes, and it must be said they looked to a return and they forgot about the universal aspect. And whole sections of Jewry were traumatized by it, and took them a long time to emancipate themselves. And even in the 19th century, there was still secret adherence to it. So the reaction to it was threefold. First of all, there was a minority which agreed with the Zionists. Secondly, there was a minority to which I've referred, who sponsored the advert and so on, which believed that the Zionism of Herzl was a danger to both Judaism and Jewry. But they were both minorities. The majority of Jews went on their daily tasks, went not convinced by the Zionist argument, but at that time, it has to be said, were also not convinced by the idea that it was necessarily a danger to Judaism and the Jews. Came the Balfour Declaration, and people who agreed broadly with the line of Achat Am included the Chancellor of the Hebrew University, Judah Magnus, who was concerned with Arab-Jewish reconciliation. And he opposed the Balfour Declaration as a Zionist because he believed that it would divide Jews from the Arabs. So, and there have always been Zionists who believed in cooperation. But it has to be said that the mainstream labor movement, while it has paid lip service to cooperation, in practice has always in the end discriminated against the Palestinians. That is the tragedy of the position. And that led to the Nakba in 1948, when Palestinians were driven out of their habitations, although the defenders of Israel didn't think it necessary to man the borders with the Arab states, because the Arab states were too weak. They acted against Ben Gurion acted against the Palestinians while paying lip service to peace. And just as there's been a peace movement within Zionism and outside it, also within Zionism there were people who believed in violence. The revisionist movement of Vladimir Jabotinsky, who was rightly, in my view, rightly called a Jewish fascist by Benito Mussolini, believed that Jordan should also be part of Israel, and that this should be defended by an army, and that Israel should be established by arms. That led to the Stern Gang and the Stern Gang's terrorism, and Jabotinsky was succeeded by Menachem Begin, Menachem Begin eventually by Netanyahu. And Netanyahu draws on that. He's within that tradition, and at the same time marries it to the tradition of neoconservatism in the United States. And people like that have come together. Critics of Jewish treatment of the Palestinians have come together in organizations like J Street in America and Jews for Justice for Palestinians in this country to put the case, irrespective of whether, like myself, there were people who were always skeptical about Zionism, or whether there were Zionists whose Zionism didn't live up to their ideals. And the only solution is that the United Nations, which includes the United States, has to put sufficient pressure on Israel so that the Israelis are forced to make the necessary the concessions to the Palestinians which enable a viable two-state solution, and that two-state solution has to include a Jewish state whose borders may be slightly different, but which can be no larger than that which existed between 1948 to 67. It means the division of Jerusalem, and it means a just settlement of the Palestinian problem of return, the refugee problem. This is possible if the pressure is put. The trouble with the whole problem is that there is a lot of sympathies with settlers stemming from colonialism within the West. Jimmy Carter has written a very, very good book about the Palestinian-Israel conflict, but it's got a preface. And the preface said that from a time he wasn't concerned about it because he thought it was like the resettlement by his grandfathers of the Indians in America and a new territory. That resettlement, in fact, was a tragedy as big as a Palestinian tragedy. It's sympathy with the settlers which prevents a settlement. A settlement is possible. We have to live up to Jewish ideals, and not only Jews, others as well, because they've inspired the Judeo-Christian civilization of the West. But we don't live up to them. We've got to do it. We can do it. We shall do it. We shall overcome.